I live in France. I'm 19 years old and this story happened to me this summer, just after the lockdown ended. After it had, I went to my grandparents for a few weeks. I was tested before I left and it was negative. My grandparents live in a small city in the north of France and they have a dog. She's quite a big dog, and when I was really young, I lived at my grandparents' for a year, and at that time the dog was only a puppy. Her name is Chippy, which in French means little devil, but in an affectionate way. I played with her a lot while I was living there, and we became very close. This is important for later. So two of my hobbies are going for long walks and running. So every evening I would go out for a long walk with the dog. There's a track that follows a path through a forest nearby, then there's a small hill. On top of that hill, it then leads into a big area full of fields. I know the area well as I run there a lot, and the air is fresh and the view is quite beautiful. So at this time in my life I was going there with the dog every day, and it was also helping my grandparents as they didn't have the energy to give her the exercise she needed. The first time we went there, nothing worth mentioning happened. We just enjoyed our walk. It's around 6 to 7 kilometers in distance, so it took about an hour. The next evening it was around 10 p.m. when we'd arrived at the top of the hill in the field, and there was still some light because it was summer. There were 3 other people walking in the fields that evening, and I could see that they were younger than me, probably about 15 or 16. I also noticed that they were smoking, so my guess was that they would come here so they couldn't be seen by their parents. We approached them and passed them. I greeted them politely and they reciprocated. All fine. For a whole week I did this walk at around the same time, and we passed by those 3 guys with no problem. The second week began, and as usual I went for the walk with the dog Chippy, but this time when we'd arrived at the fields, there was only one of the 3 boys. He wasn't smoking this time, and when he'd noticed me, I was standing at the entrance of the field, just after the little hill climb, so the entrance of the forest was just behind me. He did a sign with his hand to catch my attention and asked if I had a lighter, which I did. It was in my pocket. I told him, "Yeah, sure." So he walked over to me, his hands in the pockets of his hoodie. The closer he got to me, the more I felt that something wasn't right. I felt a shiver. It's crazy how your instinct knows there's a problem, but your head doesn't listen because nothing looks weird to you. He was now standing in front of me, and I handed over the lighter. At that moment, my dog was staring at him. After that, everything just happened so fast. He very quickly whipped his hand out of his hoodie pocket, and I could see something shining. My reflexes kicked in and I threw myself back so hard that I fell down. In that moment I realized that it was a knife he was holding and he had just tried to stab me. But what really saved me was my dog, God bless her. When she saw the guy trying to stab me, she jumped on him and he fell down. I immediately jumped to my feet and heard something behind me. From the entrance of the forest I could see 2 guys wearing animal masks and they were running towards me. It was his 2 friends. In moments like this, your brain just acts without thought, and in this case the answer my brain found was really simple. While the other guy was still on the ground, I looked at my dog and told her to run. I started running and Chippy followed me. I then heard the worst possible thing from the guy who was now up off the ground. He shouted, "Catch him! Don't let him go!" I was absolutely terrified. I was just running, and I could hear them running behind me. All I was thinking was, how long will they follow me, and who the hell are they? This was the first time I was actually really happy that I was a runner, as I was clearly better than the guys chasing, and it's what saved me, because they chased for something that felt like an eternity to me. Fortunately, at the end of the field there's another entrance to the forest, and it descended to a road at the end. I could hear that the steps of the 3 guys had stopped as I arrived at the end of the forest, though I didn't stop running until I arrived at my grandparents' house and locked the door. I took a deep breath and gave my dog a huge hug. I could see in her eyes that she'd completely understood what had just happened, and I had never been so happy to have her in my life. I told my grandparents everything, and we called the police, but they didn't find anyone. I don't know what these guys wanted, but the animal masks made me think that they were some kind of Satanists. I really don't want to know either way. I still do long walks with Chippy, the hero dog, but I now go earlier and to places with a few more people. I live in a small town in South Africa. Near my town is a large patch of woods, and since the outbreak of coronavirus, I haven't been in the woods for a long time. Until yesterday. My friend called me to ask if I wanted to join him and a few other mates to play a game of paintball in the woods, and obviously I was keen. I got my paintball gear and gun and headed off to my mate's place. There were 6 of us in total: Chase, Liam, Matt, Joey, Stephen and me. We headed off to the woods but made a few stops to fill up on petrol and get some gas for the paintball guns. When we finally got to the woods, we parked the cars, got in our gear and ventured out into the forest to find the perfect spot to begin. Eventually we got deep enough and to an area with sufficient cover and space to play a good game of Capture the Flag. We played a couple of games, and since it was winter, it got dark really quickly, but we'd planned for it and brought our flashlights. So we decided to play a couple of night games, which is extremely hard, especially in the forest we were in. During one match, Joey and I decided to sit out because we were both tired and just needed a quick breather, and the others continued to play from a significantly good distance away from us. While we were chilling, I was rolling up a joint, and Joey went to take a piss a couple of meters away from me. While I was busy rolling, I had the flashlight pointing towards myself, since there was no other light to allow me to see what I was doing, or see around me. It was pitch black. I couldn't even see 2 meters ahead of myself. Suddenly I heard footsteps coming my way, but I thought it was just Joey. I soon realized, though, that I couldn't see any light from his flashlight, so I suddenly became more vigilant. I still had an element of relaxation, thinking he was trying to play a prank on me or something. When the footsteps stopped a few meters away from me, I lifted up my flashlight and pointed it in the direction of where I heard the footsteps and scanned the area, but I just saw bushes and trees. I thought it might just be Joey hiding in the bushes or behind a tree, waiting to give me a jump scare. But then I heard footsteps coming in the opposite direction, and when I looked I could see it was Joey because he was holding his flashlight. That's when I stopped what I was doing and picked up my flashlight and paintball gun, and when Joey reached me I whispered, "Bro, I think there's someone over there." Joey obviously didn't believe me and just said to me to stop being a baby, but he soon regretted saying that because I decided to do one last scan of where I had heard the footsteps with my flashlight. And to my horror, I saw someone peeking and staring right at me from behind a tree, probably 10 or 11 meters away from us. I just shouted, "What the actual fuck?" When Joey heard me say this, he looked at me and then to where I was looking and instantly jumped up, picking up his paintball gun also. We stared at each other for at least 2 minutes, but it felt like forever until he stepped out from behind the tree. He was a large man, at least 6 foot, and was honestly filthy, like he hadn't taken a bath in years, and he was wearing baggy ripped-up jeans and just an old dirty zipped-up bomber jacket. Plus, we could tell that he was either on something or he was just batshit crazy. We also noticed that he was holding something behind his back. He finally said, "What are you guys doing out here when it's so dark?" We couldn't even answer him because of the shock we were in. Joey stuttered with fear in his voice. We were just leaving." But the man nodded his head in disagreement and said, "No, you're not. Your friends are still playing the game." I felt a shiver down my spine. "How about we play a game of our own while we wait for your friends?" And that's when he finally showed us what he was hiding behind his back, and it was a large machete. At this point I knew we had to get out of there, so I aimed my paintball gun, and in the toughest way I could muster up I told him, "Leave now or I'll shoot," even though I only had about 6 or 7 paintballs loaded. Joey did the exact same thing and aimed his gun at the man, even though he had no paintballs left in his gun at all. The guy didn't even flinch, but he did something that honestly made my skin crawl. He just smiled and said, "The game starts now." Then he suddenly just rushed at us. I told Joey to run while I fired my last bullets at him. Luckily I shot him in the head, which caused him to fall, so that was our chance to book it and link up with our other friends. But as soon as we started running, we could hear his footsteps again, and he was gaining on us. We could barely see, but we couldn't slow down. We knew what would happen if we did. So we just carried on, sprinting our hearts out until we heard other paintball guns being fired. We knew we were close. Joey started shouting to get everyone's attention, and all of a sudden I heard a huge thud. Joey had tripped and twisted his ankle. I turned around to help him up, and when I did I could see the man running full sprint towards us. In that moment I thought it was going to be the end for us, but our friends heard our screams for help and rushed over to us, and when they saw the man they just started firing at him. He knew he wasn't going to be able to take us all on, and he decided to turn around and disappear into the forest. We helped Joey up, rushed to get our stuff, and rushed to the cars. When we got to my friend's place, we helped Joey treat his ankle, and I proceeded to tell my friends everything that had happened, and they were all creeped out. It's safe to say that the next time that I'm in those woods, I will be more vigilant. Hey folks, I'm kind of new, and this is the first story I've submitted here, so let's get started. I must clarify though that this didn't happen only to me, but my uncle too. This story is about an incident that occurred after a Christmas Eve party. The end of the night had come, and everyone was leaving to go home. I decided to stay behind because my cousin and I were watching a movie. My uncle, who would at this time of night walk his dogs into the woods next to a park, went off to take them out. Before he left though, my aunt asked him not to go, because she said it was too dark. It was around 4 or 5 a.m. at the time. But he dismissed her request and went anyway. I could see that my aunt was really worried, so I offered to go along with him. We set off into the dark, and once we'd arrived at the usual spot, everything was as normal and all was quiet. My uncle and his dogs were having their relaxing walk as usual, and I was just there, not really paying attention to our surroundings, when all of a sudden the dogs went dead still. Now this wasn't altogether that strange, as they'd always stop like this if they'd seen another animal, like a rat or bird, insect or other dogs. However, this time was different. When the dogs became still, my uncle and I noticed something was really wrong. The dogs weren't angry or curious, like they would be if they'd seen another animal. No, they were kind of nervous, anxious and afraid. The largest of them was growling and visibly shaking. At this point my uncle was getting worried about the potential situation, and then we heard it. People in the woods. We couldn't see how many though because of it being so dark. They were saying something though. We all gather here by the blood of something, we something, thee and thy something. We couldn't make it all out, but as my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs and we got the hell away from those woods. As we were all leaving, he turned his head to look back and he could see a slight movement of branches and shrubs, as if someone was trying to hide. Since then he hasn't walked his dogs near those woods, or when it gets dark again. I was about 12 years old at the time, and a member of a unisex scouts group, one of about 4 girls in our troop. We went to a jamboree with loads of other scout groups and camped there for a few nights. During the day we did a range of activities, a lot of which were based in a wooded area very close to the area we were camping in. And every night there was some sort of entertainment for us to go to if we wanted to. On the first night, the other girls and I started talking to a group of older guys who were also camping with their troop for a few days. They were pretty nerdy, and we weren't particularly attracted to them, but they seemed nice and we had a good laugh with them. Whenever we saw them for the next couple of days, we would say hi and chat when we could. It was nice to talk to some other boys than the ones in our group. The boys in our troop were older than me and were pretty protective of us girls, so they made sure these other boys knew they were with us. So we felt pretty safe being at a scout event with the older boys watching over us. The night before we left, we had a disco. Everyone got dressed up and we went along to dance and listen to the music. By this point, we had got to know the boys pretty well, or as well as we could have in a couple of days. At the disco, a couple of the boys asked if we wanted to go for a walk, in view of the disco, and just hang out away from the scout leaders, as it was our last night. Me and another girl went off with them, but we weren't far from the disco, and we could hear and see everything that was going on. After a while, my friend needed the bathroom, so headed back towards the disco tent. I stayed where I was and kept hanging out with these boys. Big mistake. Looking back, I should have gone with her. How well did I really know these boys? But at 12 years old, I was pretty naive and didn't think anything bad would happen. They suggested we head back, but take a slightly longer route round so we could see the stars, still within full view of the disco. Suddenly one of the boys held my hand. I felt super uncomfortable, but was really shy back then and didn't know what to do. I saw him shine a light on our hands and wink at his mates, who very quickly disappeared. Now it was just me and him. Now I was even more uncomfortable. He proceeded to tell me he was really into me, even though he was 2 or 3 years older, and wanted to finish the trip on a high. He started to lead me towards the woods and further away from everyone else. I was inwardly panicking, freaking out and not knowing what to say or do. I was in shock and frightened. I tried to pull my hand away, but he held it tighter. He stared forwards and kept telling me how beautiful I was and how he couldn't wait to have some alone time. At 12 years old, this is the last thing I wanted. I really felt that if I went with him, it wouldn't end well, but I was too scared to do anything. I didn't feel I could get away even if I tried. Then he started to sing along to a song from the disco, which was becoming fainter and fainter. Is this the way to Amarillo? I was terrified. I couldn't see any way out. In the midst of my panic, I suddenly heard something that filled me with utter relief. The boys from my troop were calling me and walking towards us. He let go of my hand, and as soon as I felt him let go, I ran to the boys I knew, and they took me back to our camp. The next day we were leaving, and I was so relieved. We were waiting to get on the minibus home when I heard his voice behind me. He told me he had a great night, and it was a shame we got interrupted. He asked for my number, and this was before cell phones, so he wanted my home number. One of the boys in my group answered for me, though, and told him no, and it was best he left me alone. I'm 27 now, but still cannot listen to that song. If I hear it, my body is filled with dread and I feel sick. Thankfully, I never saw him again, and I hope I never do. This experience happened to me when I was 14 years old. I hadn't spoken to anyone about the event since it happened, not even my significant other. I'm 20 years old now, about to double major with my first 2 degrees in psychology and anthropology. Recently, for reasons unknown to me, the memories of this strange happening have resurfaced and are continuing to plague my waking thoughts, as well as my unconscious and subconscious. As we are taught in psychology, talking about the situation could help with repressed trauma. So here it goes. I live in the high desert mountains of Southern California, situated just below the Sierra Nevadas, about 30 minutes west of Mojave. Now my town is no booming metropolis. At the time our largest market was a Kmart, one of the last still in business I might add, and we only had 4 stoplights in town. This takes place in a subsection of the town about 13 miles from the shops, banks and restaurants in a small community largely inhabited by retirees. It's smack dab in the middle of summer, and the temperatures were well in the high 90s to lower hundreds. My nightly routine would consist of walking my Australian Shepherd. However, I would wait until it was almost dark to avoid the heat. I grabbed my phone, a small pocket knife, some headphones, my pup, and set out for my nightly walk. My community is also home to a significant amount of equestrian riders, as well as cattle ranchers. The trails I walked were designated horse riding trails, set between pastures. That night I had decided to take the horse trail that stretches for approximately 2 miles between back-to-back paddocks. It's basically a long, narrow trail that's between very large backyards. My ending destination was the Equestrian Centre, a communal equestrian park where all types of horse riders could enjoy various activities on their horses. Making my way through the sandy terrain of the trail, it was nearly dark now. The sky was becoming a deeper shade of blue every time I looked up, and my dog was becoming harder to see. I estimated my arrival at the Equestrian Centre to be around 15 minutes from my current position, so I sent a text to my mother. "I'll be at the Equestrian Centre in about 15 minutes. Could you meet me there? I'm too tired to walk back." My mother replied, "Sure, I'll leave in 10 minutes. Now at this point I was just outside the east entrance of the Equestrian Centre, where the Enchanted Forest Trail connects to the straight trail I was on, sort of like a 3-way intersection. You can either go left into the Enchanted Forest Trail, or go straight into the Equestrian Centre. Before I reached the intersection of trails, I noticed a shift in my dog's behaviour as she became anxious and seemingly worried. She had her eyes fixated to the forest and stopped dead in her tracks. I played it off as another animal within the forest, like a bobcat or boar, as they weren't uncommon in my area. I gave her a slight tug on her collar, although she was still incessantly focused on the forest. With a little more convincing, I was able to get her moving forward, pushing on towards the Equestrian Centre when my mother would be waiting for our arrival. Now it was nearly pitch black, with only the moon guiding me with its low light. There was just the slightest of visibility, forcing me to turn on my cell phone's dim flashlight. Entering the Equestrian Centre now, I noticed something that startled me immensely. A very tall person. A man, about 10 to 15 feet into the Enchanted Forest Trail, with his back towards me, standing completely still, his head facing the sky, and his hands open, palms pointing in front of him, while his arms are at his side. He was tall, approximately 6 feet, slim build, short dark hair, was wearing what looked to be light blue scrubs, or at least a very thin blue napkin-like material, and was barefoot. What startled me the most was his demeanour and what he was doing. His stance was enough to scare anyone in that setting, but as I approached him slowly, it appeared to me he was shaking, vibrating or slightly convulsing, but doing so while standing up. It didn't seem like he had any control over it, although he kept his balance perfectly. Scared and not entirely sure what to do, I asked him, "Hello? Excuse me?" I paused momentarily and raised my voice slightly with the next question. "Is everything all right?" When I said that, he stopped shaking altogether, but still didn't turn around or move another muscle. He just remained in that same creepy position. For a brief moment I had thought I might have been imagining it. I glanced down at my dog, and she was also concerned with the state and condition of this man, and began growling quietly. Then I knew it wasn't all in my head. When I looked back up, he had moved closer to me, about 7 feet closer, now almost on my trail's path. I had only looked at my dog for a split second, and he had done it without making a sound. He still wasn't facing me either, and his hands were still open, head still facing the sky. I wasn't about to wait and see what this guy was doing or what his intentions were, so I slowly eased my way past him towards the equestrian centre as quietly as I could before I felt that I was at a safe enough distance to start sprinting as fast as I could away from this guy. When I reached the first arena of the equestrian centre, I looked back into the direction of the forest, completely out of breath, and there he was. He was standing on the edge of the trail, outside of the forest, just standing there, facing me. I was too far away to see his face, and frankly I didn't want to. I couldn't make out features. All I could see was his silhouette, illuminated by the moonlight, peeking through the forest's trail. I continued to run with no intention of stopping until I found someone. I had never been so happy to see my nagging neighbour Penny and her moody mare Jolene riding in the Milano area. She noticed my distress, but due to her already harsh opinions of me, I had told her I had been on an endurance run and was just very out of breath and tired. I wanted to avoid any small-town gossip as much as I could. My mother arrived with impeccable timing. During the ride home, I broke down in a state of paranoia, distress and panic at what I had just witnessed. My mother didn't know exactly what to make of it, so she recommended I file a police report with the local PD. About an hour after getting home, an officer showed up to take my statement. Following up the next day, the same officer claims to have gone and checked out the area, but didn't find anyone or anything, apart from some partially bare footprints. But there's nothing incriminating or suspicious about someone going for a walk without shoes. He played it off as a joke and accused me of being under the influence, but I can assure you I was completely sober. Nothing ever came out of this. I attended weekly therapy sessions for almost 2 years following this event, and never went out on walks by myself ever again. I had night terrors about the man, and still do. I still don't know what to make of it all. I don't know if I ever will. From 2013 to 2019, I worked in outdoor education at many different summer camps and outdoor education centres in Canada, mostly Ontario, but I did spend a season in the Rocky Mountains. Having grown up going to sleepaway camp and eventually participating in month-long leadership programs with backcountry canoeing components, I was well prepared to lead a group of teen girls from a camp in Georgian Bay on a 2-week camping trip in the Temagami region during my first year as counsellor. The Temagami region is located between North Bay, Sudbury and Timmins, Ontario. This region is home to many provincial parks, wonderful hiking and canoeing routes, and the Bear Island Indian Reserve. Our route was fairly typical and began at the Whitefish Falls region, ending at Highway 11 after 14 days of paddling, portaging, hiking and campfire making. We had a satellite phone to check in with our camp director every day, and in case of an emergency, we also had multiple exit points along the route, and until our second to last night, we were having fun and a relatively uneventful time, besides some mild dehydration and the usual bumps and bruises. Near the end of our trip, we were doing some free camping on the shore of an uninhabited island in Bear Lake that is recognised as part of the Bear Island Indian Reserve. It's a beautiful area, and we were across from the main island that the majority of the 250-person population inhabits. We had put out the fire and gone to bed. When about an hour after falling asleep, I was jarred awake by the sound of a loud motorboat. Obviously this isn't that weird, because it's a large lake, and many people use boats to reach the mainland or their homes on secluded islands. However though, it was around 11 p.m, and things had been quiet for the last few hours. The motorboat cut out and I could clearly hear the sounds of an argument. It sounded like at least one man and a woman, and they were very angry and yelling at each other, although I couldn't hear anything specific because they were too far offshore. Suddenly the woman screamed, and I heard a splash into the water, and then complete silence followed. At this point I was pretty freaked out, and hoping to God that my girls hadn't woken up. But I wasn't that lucky, because I could immediately hear talking from their tent, and could tell they were scared. I was about to unzip my door and look out to see if maybe the boaters had had an accident or something, when my whole tent lit up. The light slowly panned across me and onto the tent my girls were in, which immediately made them quiet, and in my normal volume I was able to tell them to stay absolutely still. The light panned back to my tent and then over to theirs again. I can only guess that it must have been some sort of boat with a searchlight on it. If anyone has any ideas of what type it could have been, let me know in the comments. And after what felt like an eternity, but was really only about 5 minutes, the light was turned off and I heard the motor engage, then fade as the boat drove away from us. I immediately found the satellite phone and called our camp director, who gave us the phone number for the local police. I called them, and they said they would forward the information I'd given to the local native detachment on Bear Island. I don't think any of us slept that night, and I got up at 5 a.m. to take my canoe out and look around. I thought maybe someone had fallen overboard and had managed to swim to shore. Obviously I didn't find anyone, and there was nothing floating in the water either, although it is a pretty deep body of water. None of us wanted to camp one more night, so I called the camp and had them head out to the pickup point a day early. We paddled like hell and didn't really talk much. I think none of us really wanted to speculate about what we might have heard and what would have happened if we'd made a noise or moved when that light was on our tents. I've thought about this a lot over the years, but whenever I've told people the story, they've been quite skeptical. I recently started looking into missing person cases in the area, but without much luck. If anyone reading this is familiar with Indigenous issues in Canada though, there is an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, and these cases usually go unreported or unsolved. Hey fearsome friends, thanks for listening. Please make sure you subscribe and click that notification button so you can be aware of my videos when they upload. If you have a story that you'd like to hear me record, then please send it to my subreddit rmissfearsome83, or alternatively email me at missfearsome83@hotmail.com. If you'd also like to support me further, please go to my Patreon, where you can join for as little as $1 a month, where you'll get early access to all my recordings, and they will also be available as MP3 downloads. I also have some great merch on the Teespring website. All links are in the description below. Stay safe, stay happy, and remember, keep being creepy.